encounters where they have these 2-week survival get-togethers where they put like Palestinians with Israelis or Bosnians with Serbs for a couple weeks, and they have to learn to survive with each other. We have Sharif Alegnafi. He's an Egyptian judge, and he is bringing mediation practices to Egypt and the Middle East. Maksud Shir is another peace fellow, and he's from Afghanistan, and he, with Rotary, helped bring a lot of computers to schools in Afghanistan. And one of his dear friends set up a rural school, and word got out to the Taliban, and somehow they thought he was a threat to them, and he was executed. But Maksud is taking up his friend's task and is opening up his own school, again, in the same area, having worked out the details with local leaders and the Taliban so he can go about his educating the people there. Stina Marie Jacobson, she's a project artist, and she has a project called the Direct Approach, where they ask people, what is the most violent scene in a movie you've ever seen? And through that, people talk about violence, and they get to talk about their perceptions of violence in a real indirect way. And over on the right, you see my friend Rich Sergon, and he helped mediate 2 fighting groups of tribes in Kenya that were fighting over cattle rustling, and in the process they're killing each other. But he was able to facilitate a group of women from the 2 tribes to work out some level of peace between and healing between those tribes. So those are some of my peace fellows I had a chance to work with over this summer. It was a really enriching experience. We had a lot of visiting professors, and we went over conflict analysis and basically how conflict starts, and the different whether who's the actors, what kind of behaviors, what kind of contradictions and connectors and dividers that go into a conflict analysis. We also learned about basic facts of conflict. The fact that conflict has been pretty much on the upswing since 2010, pretty much, and it's just recently dropped off. But battle deaths due to conflict last year amounted to 118,000. Now that comes from the work of Eric Melander. He's the director of the Uppsala University's conflict data program, and they track conflict throughout the world. So he came and spent a week with us. That's amazing. We had that kind of person there. Another thing he pointed out that in the 1900s, about 80% of the casualties in war were soldiers in the 1900s. Now it's 80% civilians today. So it's flip-flopped. 80% of the casualties of war are civilians today. So I thought was really interesting. And also since 2001, the percentage of wars dealing with religious wars or jihadi wars has been on the uprise. So instead of going down from conflict in 2001, it's just continued to go up. So that's what that chart shows. So I thought those are some salient points to keep in mind. There's a lot of things that I'd love to touch about, just because we had Dr. Chaiwat Sata Anand, who said, rape is to sex as violence is to power. It destroys it. I thought that was really powerful too. And the fact that non-violent groups, or at least independence groups using non-violence, are a lot more successful than groups using violence, usually a 2-to-1 ratio. So that's something to keep in mind. And he goes and he talks to people about that, and to change their ways from being violent protesters or violent groups to non-violent protesters, right? And the fact that gender and peace is a big deal because conflict affects women and men differently. And 80% of all victims of war are civilians. 70% are women and children. Yet, only 12%, 9 to 12% of all peace processes have women as participants. So that's something to keep in mind. They're the ones that have to keep the peace, right? And they're often the ones that suffer most. And also, that's one of our instructors, Irene Santiago. She's helped mediate the peace in Mindanao in the Philippines. And also about male sexuality and male gender and war and our concept of what masculinity means, right? To be a man, and that there's a lot more tools other than violence and for power and control. There's other ways of influencing situations. So that's something that I think we all have to look at. And of course, sometimes inner peace starts within before you can push that out in the world. And this is, had an opportunity to go motorcycling in northern Thailand. And this is my Australian guide, Dave. And he took a picture of me going to a stream bed there. So it was a lot of fun. But I also met a forest monk who's the director of peace studies at a Buddhist university in Thailand. And here he is. His name is Dr. Hansa Dhammahaso, and he believes in creating peace engineers at his university, which I thought was really interesting. And here I'm at a Buddhist shrine over here. So, so I think that's really important, is being on the path to finding inner peace before you can push it out to anyone else, right? And how to be persistent. This is the former Prime Minister or Foreign Minister of Thailand, and he forged the peace agreement with Vietnam after the Vietnam War. But he said, a river cuts through rock not because of its power, but because of its persistence. And I think that's a lot to do with peace work. And to begin with that, it's really important that we look at dialogue as the beginning of peace process and engaging with people that we might not normally speak with, whether they're fishermen in a Malay Thai fishing village in the south or the Thai military who are currently in conflict. We have to know all their positions. So with that in mind, I had a wonderful time, and I really do appreciate all the effort and the support I had this summer in Thailand, and I'm more than happy to share that experience with you, and certainly I can go into more depth, but that just sort of gave a highlight of some of the teaching that went on there and some of the learning. So with that, thank you very much.
And let me explain format is Jennifer will come up and also do a short presentation. Then Bill Barmore, we'll go in more in depth in some questions, filling out some of the stuff that y'all done about how you got here and where you're going to be going. And then Lisa Pauls is here. The Brazosport Club has a pretty darn good scholarship program at the high school graduate level. So we're dealing with scholarships of all ilk. And so then Bill, who is, again, our Global Grant Scholar Chair or Co-Chair with Bill Haglund. I deal more with Barmore, you can understand why. He's in the back. And so we got all sorts of, you're gonna do that or you're gonna do the, okay. So we're working on these stuff.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Gueler, and I was one of the 2015-2016 Global Grant Scholars from this past year. I was in London, England, and I just got back about 2 months ago. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, my background, what I did in my grant year, and what I've been doing since I've been back. So I'm 22 years old, and I grew up in Houston, Texas, with a single parent, my dad, who's an ER physician. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents who are immigrants from Buenos Aires, and I had an on and off again relationship with my mother, which is one of the reasons that I was interested in psychology, which is what I studied at Rice University here in Houston. Another reason that I was interested in psychology was because of my younger cousin Nicholas, who is high functioning on the autism spectrum, something that used to be called Asperger's, which is no longer a diagnosis. But so I was really interested in the human condition and in human emotion and behavior. But I also knew that I was interested in medicine because I had spent a lot of time in the emergency room with my father when I was a child. When I was at Rice, I did a lot of things with volunteering and medicine because those were my interests. So I was one of the outreach coordinators at Rice, and we did a lot of work at Texas Children's Hospital, particularly with the Child Life Program, which works with children who are there long term, mostly with the oncology unit and with progressive care, and also with Peaceful Kingdom Retreat for Children near Colleen, and that's an all-access camp for children who have special needs, whether that's medical, physical, emotional. A lot of children whose parents are in the military, as it's near Fort Hood. And I also did research at Gueler College of Medicine, working with women with PTSD and also with adults with treatment-resistant depression. So when I graduated from Rice, I was looking for a way to take a year off before medical school and to travel, but I also wanted to further my education, but also do something with service in a way that combined my passions for children, for psychology, and for medicine. I got involved with Rotary through the Global Grant Program, and I was hosted by the Rotary Club of River Oaks, which is now the Rotary Club of the Galleria River Oaks, Judy, who's here, and with Maria Novella Vitucci at the Rotary Club of Westminster East in London. In London, I was under the Rotary focus of maternal and child health, and I studied at University College of London, specifically at the Institute of Child Health at Great Ormond Street Hospital, where I did a Master's of Science in Child and Adolescent Mental Health. I lived in Bloomsbury at the Goodenough College, which is a really, really interesting place. It's an international hall specifically for postgraduate students for all of the institutions in London. So there's a very diverse group of students studying any type of master's or PhD program. So while I was in London, I was taking very many classes related to mental health, and these are kind of the concerns that I came across when I was in the NHS looking at their mental health services. First, mental health services are not particularly accessible or affordable. There's low access to mental health services, and there's high out-of-pocket costs. This is particularly true for disadvantaged communities, and those are often the communities that need these services the most. There's also a lasting stigma around mental health, and there's concerns over labels and diagnoses being placed on people. And even in the UK's National Health Services, there's still disparities and gaps in mental health services. Even though there's a nationalized healthcare system there, the trust resources are variable depending on the different geographic and socioeconomic factors. And some services have wait lists of up to a year for people to be seen in mental health services. There's also gaps between different age groups, and some people fall just below thresholds for meeting service needs. So why do I think this is a problem? I think that's a really slippery slope. I think that some people, when they're undiagnosed and they're restricted in their access to care, that means that they're not receiving treatment, or they're not going to be compliant, whether that's due to a lack of education, stigma surrounding mental health, or their socioeconomic and cultural circumstances. That's going to lead to them having difficulty completing their education or retaining a job. This is particularly true with things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum disorders, and mood disorders. It can also result in things like substance abuse, incarceration, forced hospitalization, and homelessness. 40% of young people with conduct disorders will become juvenile offenders, and then we see that 75%, and that's a conservative estimate, of offenders have a mental health history, mental health problems. And we see this a lot with people with psychosis. And then also, I think, as someone who's in medical school right now, I think that a lot of physicians fail to consider what I call the biopsychosocial model and non-biological risk factors. So something that I talked a lot about in my course when we were talking about child mental health is what we talk about as biopsychosocial, meaning that biology, psychology, and sociology interact dynamically, and all play significant roles in human function and in disease. So when we talk about things in the current context of medicine, we're talking about chronic illnesses. So things like diabetes and noncompliance. Diabetes is a disease that considers things like psychology and sociology and economics. All of those have to be considered when we're treating a patient, not just what's going on biologically in their system. While I was in London, I worked on 2 different research projects. I worked on one at Great Ormond Street Hospital to do children with genetic disorders who present with neurodevelopmental difficulties. I also worked on one at King's College London, which is my thesis, which I just turned in 2 weeks ago, which is predictive factors for emotional and behavioral problems in preschool-age children with autism spectrum disorders, which is kind of what I was just talking about, looking at socioeconomic and psychological predictive factors for comorbid diagnoses. So moving forward, this global grant year actually encouraged me to start my MPH. So I already knew that I was going to go to medical school, but I've decided to do a dual degree program. So I'm now doing a medical degree and a master's of public health. I just started my first year at UT Southwestern in Dallas. So moving forward, I'm really looking at how we as professionals in child health and pediatrics can screen for and be aware of signs of mental health concerns very early on in healthcare so that we can intervene as quickly and effectively as possible, because we know that the sooner we intervene, the better the outcomes are for children's health. Also, how we can look at biopsychosocial medicine and integrating that into the American healthcare system so that we can address public health concerns. Outside of academics, I had an amazing time in London. I tried to be really involved in the community. I was tutoring local year 5s in one of the disadvantaged boroughs in London in math and English, trying to catch them up. They were mostly from families where the parents were not native English speakers, who were working several jobs and were not home very frequently, trying to make sure that they weren't falling through the cracks in the schooling system. I picked up the English style of horse riding because I wanted to pick up an English hobby. I tried to be really involved in English culture, went to Ascot and Wimbledon, and I went on quite a few trips within the UK trying to get a real sense of the culture and the history. See some pictures at Stonehenge, and I went to see Les Miserables, and at Wimbledon, I went to see Djokovic. My first weekend in the UK, they hosted a wonderful Link weekend for all of the scholars. The UK is one of the most popular destinations for Rotary Global Grant Scholars. There were about 40 of us. So they had us all go to Warwick. They took us on a tour of Warwick Castle, and you can see John and Norma in the top corner. They were my Rotary hosts, and they were just the most lovely couple. They welcomed me so graciously into their home. And really the Rotary family in London is so supportive. They welcomed us at their district conference. They had us for quite a variety of events. They had us for chips and fish, for mulled wine at Christmas time. Stella, who's the Rotary Global Grant Scholar coordinator in London, had us over for a summer tea party in her garden. They are the most gracious, diverse, welcoming group of people. And the scholars there are they're so incredible, and I would really encourage you to continue supporting this program, because this group of people, I mean, they're really going to change the world. Some of these scholars, they're adults from West Point who are studying peace and conflict resolution. There are scholars from Belgium who are working at the UN who are studying immigration reform. And these are some of the most important issues going on in the world today that I really think are going to make such a difference moving forward in coming generations. So thank you so much for supporting me and for continuing supporting the grant program.
Jennifer, you'll